Hello, I'm Lynn Krebs, research economist at the Texas Real Estate Research Center at Texas A&M University. Well, over the last 12 months, the volume of sales has declined 34.7% compared to the prior 12-month period. So sales activity is slowing down considerably, but results are otherwise mixed across the state. Prices, for example, statewide were up 3.7% year over year. However, we had regions that showed real positive, like 10 or 11% price increases, and other regions where prices were down as much as 4.5%. The market is really in flux, and the story across the state is rather mixed. While activity has declined over the last year and a half, the rate of decline in sales activity has moderated, so we're seeing what may be a trough or a bottom in sales activity, acres sold, and number of sales. At the same time, prices have continued to increase for the state as a whole, while, as I mentioned, some regions are weaker than others in regards to price. What we're also seeing, though, is that we think that prices are leveling off in the near term, and in fact, we expect to see prices decline over the next 2 to 6 quarters at least. And as that happens over the next quarter or two, we expect to actually see sales activity, in particular acres sold, to increase by as much as 5% over the next 3 to 7 quarters. Yeah, there have been a number of headwinds that affect the rural land markets in Texas as well as other states. Key factor, of course, are higher interest rates, higher than what we had a few years ago. That has gradually slowed overall affordability, which is affected by not only interest rates, the cost of finance, but also by available cash. The overall volume of sales has declined because it has impacted those buyers who either need to finance or who may have somewhat constrained finances due to inflation, tightening credit conditions, and those sorts of things that are impacting buyers in the market. Meanwhile, a lot of sellers have just not been willing to capitulate, and so a lot of tracts that might otherwise sell have not sold because sellers have not been willing to lower the price enough to bring those buyers in. However, we think we're near a transition in regards to that market activity. We see the rate of sales volume declining at a slower and slower rate, and in fact, we expect to see prices to level off in the next quarter. In other words, we think we've already hit a peak statewide, or we're about to hit a peak in the current quarter. We think that prices will probably decline through the rest of this year and even across 2025, maybe even into 2026. We're assuming that rates are going to remain flat for the rest of this year, maybe some gradual decline in interest rates over the next 12 months, which will start to bring some activity back in. But also, if prices do decline as we think, then that'll also start attracting buyers back into the market. And so that's where the market dynamics tend to balance out, is when buyers start to see better days ahead, when they actually start seeing evidence of those better conditions, then they're willing to step back in. And so we think that the market activity will gradually pick up while prices are flat to negative, not drastically negative. We're thinking through the end of 2025, prices may be down 7 to 8% statewide. But keep in mind, the state is really diverse. We expect to see a lot of variation. There are land market areas, for example, in the last year that were up as much as 28% year over year price, whereas there were neighboring land market areas in many cases that were actually down 20 some odd percent. One of the things that really stood out to me as being interesting in that regard and the variation were that the Northeast Texas and South Texas both saw the best price performance. Prices were up over 10% year over year, even through the first quarter of this year in the Northeast and South Texas regions. Meanwhile, those two regions saw the lowest activity in regards to the biggest drop in percentage of sales compared to the year before. So while the prices were up in those regions, the activity was really low, telling us that really it's just the high quality stuff that's selling, maybe even smaller tracts that are more commonly selling than largest tracts. However, the flip side of that is you've got regions like the Gulf Coast Brazos Bottom region, which includes Brazos County here, as well as the Central Texas region in the Austin Round Rock area, prices were actually down year over year. The first, particularly in the Gulf Coast Brazos region, were down nearly 5% year over year. So that's a huge contrast to being up 10% in the Northeast and the South. But in this region, for example, we actually saw the rate of decline in sales activity has moderated. So prices are down, but the people are, we're maintaining a level of sales activity, particularly over the last 3 quarters, that make these dynamics really interesting. And all this kind of speaks to that inflection point that we're seeing coming into the market. There's variation across the state, but overall, we're expecting to see prices to weaken some, 2 to 3% down by the end of this year, maybe 5 to 7% down by the end of next year, but we expect to see sales volumes increase by about 5% by the end of next year. And what we're really seeing, we've always seen variation right across the regions and the land market areas, but right now we're seeing tremendous variation of some still really strong price growth in some market areas and in other market areas where activity has not only dropped off, but prices has already gone negative year over year. So for example, we've got 2 regions in Texas right now where year over year through the first quarter of this year, we still saw plus 10% price appreciation. And other land market areas, other of our regions, 2 or 3 of the regions that actually saw negative year over year price change. And even within that, not everything else is the same. For example, the 2 regions that had the largest price appreciation year over year through the first quarter of this year actually saw the biggest drop off in sales activity in those same 2 regions. Whereas in the regions where prices have already turned negative, like the Gulf Coast and Brazos Bottom and the Austin Round Rock area, both of those regions, price was negative, slightly negative. The amount of drop off in sales activity is really moderated. It's down year over year, but over the last 3 quarters, it's been pretty flat. And so that tells me that the market is still got plenty of interest. A lot of people are waiting on the sidelines because they think there may be better opportunities in the near future to buy land. And so, it just comes down to, everybody's circumstances are different. If you're looking to finance your land, obviously interest rates are very, very important to you. Interest rates are higher than they have been in many years right now. Really, I think a lot of buyers expected to see rates come down this year. That hasn't materialized. We've actually been saying we didn't expect that to materialize. From our research, we thought that there were plenty of reasons to think that rates would remain where they are. Maybe 1 or 2 rate cuts this year at best, whereas in the first quarter the market was generally expecting as many as 6 rate cuts. We didn't see that in the cards then, and we still don't. We still think that rate cuts are either 1 or 2 or maybe none. I think once the market starts to be convinced once again, and for real hopefully this time when it happens, that rates will come down in the next quarter or so, you'll start to see market rates start to come down ahead of that. And I think that's going to pique the interest of buyers, particularly if they see that prices haven't been running up out of reach quickly. So a few years back, we developed a forecast model. Our model is looking closely at things like, well, what has happened over the last 2 quarters, and particularly the last quarter, and what are the differences? We're starting to see things that I've described here, such as sales volumes declining. The rate of price increase has been declining. In other words, we had peaked at like 28% year over year rate increases in 2021. The rate of increase has been coming down ever since, kind of like the rate of inflation's been coming down. We still have inflation and we still have price growth, but the rate of growth is much, much lower. As I said, we peaked in 28%. We were, hitting high teens in annual year over year price appreciation all the way through last year, at least the middle of last year. And the last few quarters, it's been in the single digits, like 5, now 3.5% annual price increases. We think that by the end of 2025, the statewide price will probably be -7 or -8% from where we are today. Yeah, so when we look at the market activity overall, we do seem to be kind of in a lull, if you will, maybe a holding pattern in regards to the level of activity. We think that there are plenty of interested market participants who are just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen next. For example, interest rates have been a little bit higher for longer than many people expected, and so people are waiting to see. A number of things that could impact the future of prices and sales activity are if there are sellers that decide for one reason or another that it's time to go ahead and list that property and list it for less than they may have hoped to get a year or two ago, then that's kind of the sort of thing that leads to transitions in land markets. In fact, over the last 3 to 4 months, maybe even 6 months, we're hearing more and more stories of listing prices being lowered. Whereas going through 2021 and 2022, that was unheard of. People were getting what they were asking for, and many times they were getting more than what they were asking for. That has definitely changed. In the last quarter, in particular, we've heard quite a few stories and seen a number of listings where prices have been decreased, and in fact, in some cases where listings have been pulled from the market and then relisted at a lower price. And so that is very indicative and supportive of what our technical model is telling us in regards to near-term, prices flattening out to declining statewide, but keeping in mind some land market areas won't see that decline like the state as a whole. So again, keep a close eye on the area that you're most interested in.